Why did laughter always sound louder when it was aimed at her? The night air was thick with the scent of grilled meat, salt, and something else, memory. The Butler family's annual summer barbecue had always been loud, predictable, a ritual of stories told too many times and pride worn like a badge. But this one felt different. Maybe because Michelle Butler had learned to live inside silence, and tonight, silence was a battlefield. Zach raised his beer, the amber light from the ticky torches flickering across his face. He was grinning like he owned the world. "To Michelle," he said, his voice carrying over the music and the waves beyond the dunes, "our family's paper pilot." Laughter erupted, raw, unfiltered, familiar. It rolled across the backyard like a tide she'd been drowning in for years. Even her father laughed softly, not in cruelty but in habit. Around the long wooden table, cousins leaned in, smirking, uncles slapped each other's backs, and somewhere a Bluetooth speaker struggled to compete with the noise. The word paper echoed in her head, light, fragile, disposable. It stung, but Michelle smiled anyway. Because silence, she had learned, was safer than truth. They didn't know. None of them did. Not the smell of smoke that never left your hair after a mission. Not the sound of rotors coughing through dust and gunfire. Not the screams on the radio when a helicopter went down and you were still overhead, helpless, circling through the chaos. They didn't know who Revenant One really was. She lifted her drink to her lips, calm, measured. "Paper burns," she said quietly, though no one heard. And when Zach went on boasting about real military toughness, the kind that required mud, bruises, and push-ups, she just listened. Words like his were easy to tune out. It was the silence that came after that hurt most. The laughter continued, but she was somewhere else now. In the cockpit, red light washing over her controls, the smell of hydraulic fluid sharp in her nose. A voice crackling through the comms, "We're pinned down. Revenant One, do you copy?" And her own voice, steady, low, calm, "Copy. I'm not leaving you behind." That memory had edges sharper than glass. Back in the present, she realized her beer can had bent under her grip. No one noticed. Maybe that was easier. The Butler family tradition, loud voices, louder pride, left no room for quiet ones like her. In their world, medals were for men, and silence meant you didn't belong. Zach leaned closer to his father, Captain Roland Butler, retired Navy SEAL and family legend. The older man's face caught the orange flicker of the fire pit, strong, lined, built on decades of discipline. Roland nodded approvingly at his son, a mirror of himself at that age. Michelle wondered, not for the first time, if there had ever been room in this family for someone who didn't need applause to prove worth. She pushed her chair back and stood. The laughter swelled again, filling the space she left behind. Beyond the fence, the beach called dark, restless, endless. She walked barefoot through the cool sand, each step pulling her further from the noise. The waves greeted her with soft violence. Foam wrapped around her ankles like memory. It was there, under the hum of the sea, that she made a quiet promise. Next time they mocked her, she wouldn't stay silent. Her voice wouldn't rise in anger. It would rise in truth. She grew up by this same coast, small town, big shadows. People here believed three things kept a family together: stay quiet, work hard, never cross the line. Michelle had broken all three before she turned 25. Her Uncle Roland's name carried weight here. His medals hung on the walls of the local bar. His stories were told between clinks of glass and smirks of admiration. He was the legend, the standard. Zach was his heir apparent, the loud, proud, unstoppable echo of a man carved by war. And her? She was just the girl who flew planes, the polite afterthought in their stories. She used to think that was enough, until she learned what silence cost. Some nights the memories came like tidewater, slow, relentless, the cockpit shaking, the red warning light flashing, the radio alive with panic. "They're down. Revenant One, they're down." And her hands moving faster than thought, cutting through cloud and gunfire, finding coordinates no one else could. She remembered the faces of the men she pulled from that burning desert. And she remembered who led them: Captain Roland Butler. Weeks later, her commanding officer had spoken softly, almost reluctantly. "Captain Butler owes you his men's lives. He knows it was you, Revenant One." She had frozen, so that was the truth hiding in plain sight. The man her family worshipped, the one whose approval she had once chased like air, had chosen silence. He knew who she was, what she'd done, and still he'd let them mock her at the table. Maybe to protect his son, maybe to protect his legend. She went home that evening hollow and electric, the kind of quiet that follows revelation. Her father found her sitting on the back porch, staring at the horizon. He didn't ask. He just sat beside her, his voice low. "Some people get applause," he said. "Others get the sound of engines." It was his way of saying he saw her, but even understanding couldn't dull the sting. That night the moon was high, silver bleeding into the waves. Michelle walked down the sand until the house lights were a blur behind her. She wasn't surprised to see Roland there, silhouette steady against the surf, a beer can dangling from his hand. The sea reflected him like a secret. He didn't turn when he spoke. "Thank you, Michelle. I know you were Revenant One." The words hit like a flare, bright, hot, gone. She didn't move. "I just did my job." "You could have said something," he said, "just once." "I didn't want Zach to feel small." His sigh drifted across the wind. "Then you made me smaller instead." For a moment the waves filled the space between them. He looked older now, less legend, more man. "You're right," he said finally. "My team still owes you one, but in the service we don't say thank you out loud, we just remember." She studied his face in the moonlight. Not cruel, just conditioned. Raised in a world where silence meant control, where acknowledgement meant imbalance. But that order they protected was choking the rest of them. "You can keep your silence," she said quietly, "if it keeps you comfortable, but the next time someone laughs at me, I won't stay quiet." Roland turned then, eyes searching hers, something like pride flickering there. "Good," he said. "You've earned the right." The tide washed over their feet. Salt, foam, forgiveness. For a heartbeat the world was still. The line between love and pride, loyalty and fear, thin as the horizon. When she returned to the house, the laughter had softened, the torches nearly out. She stood there a long moment, watching her family, their easy joy, their blind warmth, and knew this would be the last summer she let silence define her. She went to bed with the sound of waves in her ears and a decision anchoring in her chest. 2 years later, she returned home a different woman. Confidence had changed her posture, her voice, her silence. The uniform fit sharper now, not for show, but for what it represented. Still, stepping into that same backyard felt like walking into a photograph. Same songs, same smells, same people, nothing had changed but her. Zach was at the grill again, surrounded by friends, telling stories that weren't his to tell. He saw her and raised his beer, eyes glinting with that same cocky amusement. "Welcome home, Captain Butler. Heard the Navy's keeping you busy with meetings and memos." Laughter rippled through the yard. The words were light, but the tone was. She smiled, steady. "Depends on the altitude." The air stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. Roland looked up from his chair, his gaze sharp, conflicted, half warning, half respect. Michelle sat, the metal chair cool under her palms, the old pattern unfolding again like déjà vu. No one asked about her missions. No one wanted the truth, only the myth. Zach's stories filled the air like smoke. His new gym, his training programs, his favorite SEAL quotes recycled from the internet. Around them, plates clinked and laughter resumed its steady rhythm. She stayed quiet, but this time it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Then from the edge of the yard, a voice broke through. Deep, familiar. "Remember that pilot who saved your team off Mogadishu, Cap?" Sergeant Mason Hale, Roland's old SEAL brother, stood holding a drink, grin wide. What was her call sign again? The air froze. Roland hesitated, his grin faltered. "Revenant One," he said. "Hell of a pilot." The words carried like confession. Michelle's pulse stuttered. He said it out loud, finally. But no one noticed the shift except her. She caught his eye across the fire pit. He looked away. His silence for once wasn't arrogance, it was guilt. Zack laughed again, oblivious. At least that pilot's got guts. Some folks only fly simulators. She set her glass down. The sound was soft, final. Some of us fly where there are no do-overs. The laughter died instantly. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to fade. She stood, the weight of every unspoken year in her spine. Roland's eyes followed her as she walked toward the beach again. The same path, the same tide, but a different woman now. The storm wasn't above. It was at that table. And this time, she wasn't running from it. Why did the ocean always feel like confession? Michelle stopped where the tide met her boots and let the wind peel the heat from her skin. Behind her, the laughter had shrunk to a faint echo, just enough to remind her that peace in this family never lasted long. Out here, the world was honest. The salt burned, the sand shifted, and the horizon didn't pretend. She crouched, scooping a handful of wet sand. It clung to her palm, cold and heavy. That's what silence feels like, she thought. Looks soft, weighs more than people think. A seagull screamed overhead, startled by the burst of fireworks behind the dunes. Red and blue light flickered across the waves. She remembered another kind of light, the red strobe that filled her cockpit the night the rescue went wrong. Every time she closed her eyes, she still saw it. A memory that didn't fade, it pulsed. Still hiding by the water. Roland's voice was rough from years of command. He stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled, beer forgotten in the sand. For a moment, he wasn't Captain Butler or the family patriarch, just a man whose pride had aged faster than his heart. "I wasn't hiding," she said. He nodded once. "I know you were waiting." She didn't answer. The wind filled the pause for her. Roland stepped closer, the surf licking at his shoes. "Zack's a good kid," he said, almost defensively. "I didn't say he was. He just talks too much, got that from me." "And the silence?" she asked. "That too," he said, almost smiling. The waves crashed harder, drowning out the space between them. For a while they just stood there, two outlines against the restless Atlantic. "You shouldn't have had to listen to that tonight," Roland said finally. "He doesn't know, none of them do. And you never told him. I thought I was protecting you, and him. You think pride's easy to unteach." "No," she said softly, "but ignorance is worse." He stared at the dark horizon. "You're right, but sometimes a man's silence is all he's got left to hide behind." "Then you picked the wrong shield," she replied. Roland exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sigh and surrender. "He'll figure it out one day. He'll need help figuring it out." He turned to look at her, really look at her this time. "You're not planning to stay quiet anymore, are you?" "No," she said, "not anymore." Something in his expression changed. Respect, regret, maybe both. "Then I guess I should stand back." "You already are." The faintest smile touched his mouth. "Fair." They stood there until the fireworks ended and the sea was the only thing moving. When he finally walked back toward the house, Michelle stayed. The silence didn't hurt tonight. It felt earned. The next morning came with sunlight too bright for the few hours of sleep she'd gotten. Her mother was already in the kitchen, flipping pancakes and pretending not to notice the quiet tension that still hung in the air. "You'll visit longer this time?" her mother asked, setting a plate down. "2 days," Michelle said, "briefing in Norfolk Monday." "Always somewhere else," her mother murmured. "That's the job." "That's the excuse," her mother said gently. "Your father used to say the same thing." Michelle didn't answer. She just picked at the pancakes, not tasting a thing. Her thoughts were still at the beach, still hearing Roland's voice. He doesn't know. Maybe it was time he did. By afternoon, she was on the highway, the windows down, the radio low. The horizon unrolled ahead like a decision she'd already made. She didn't know how or when, but the next time Zack threw a laugh her way, the truth would meet it halfway. 3 years passed before that chance arrived. Florida heat shimmered across the Butler property, the air thick with smoke from 2 grills and the sharp sweetness of barbecue sauce. Roland's 60th birthday had turned into a reunion, a living museum of military legends. The yard was crowded with uniforms, medals, laughter that didn't know when to stop. Michelle parked down the road, taking a moment before stepping out. She could already hear Zach's voice over the crowd, bigger, brasher, unchanged. Some people matured, others just got louder. She walked through the gate wearing jeans, boots, and a light jacket. No uniform today. She didn't need one, not anymore. Zach spotted her first. "Michelle's back," he shouted, raising his beer. "Hey, Commander, still flying the desk, huh?" The crowd chuckled. Not cruelly this time, just reflex, old habits. She met his gaze and smiled faintly. "Still flying, Zach, just not as low as you think." The laughter faltered, unsure whether it was still safe to laugh. Roland looked up from his chair under the oak tree, eyes narrowing, not in disapproval, but in a kind of quiet pride he hadn't earned yet. Zach tried to smooth it over. "Relax, I'm kidding. You know I love you, right?" "You love the sound of yourself," she said softly. A few heads turned. A drunk seal at the table grinned. "You military too, sweetheart. What's your call sign?" Zach smirked, seizing the moment. "Oh yeah, let's hear it. Maybe paper wings." Michelle studied their faces, the amusement, the expectation. They thought they were teasing, not realizing they were standing at the edge of revelation. She took a breath, her voice steady but low. "Revenant One." The sound hit the table like a dropped shell casing. For a full heartbeat, no one moved. Then someone whispered, "Wait, you were the pilot in Mogadishu." Roland's chair scraped the patio. He stood, shoulders squaring, voice deepening into command. "Zach." His son blinked. "Yeah, Dad." "Apologize now." Zach laughed nervously. "Dad, it's just a joke." "For mocking the pilot who saved my men," Roland said, tone hard enough to cut glass. Color drained from Zach's face. "You mean her?" Roland's jaw set. "She flew through fire so we could come home, and you laughed at her, you didn't ask." Silence fell heavy as humidity. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter died mid-sound. Zach swallowed. "I didn't know." Michelle stood perfectly still, the wind tugging at her hair. "Now you do." He nodded once, voice breaking. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," she said, though both of them knew it was. Roland reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass coin, worn smooth with years. He placed it in her hand. "To the one who flew through fire," he said. "You earned this years ago. I should have given it then." The coin was warm from his hand. Her fingers closed around it, not as a trophy, but as proof that silence had finally lost. Behind them, fireworks erupted over the trees, but no one cheered. The sound was swallowed by something stronger, respect. Later that night, Michelle drove the coastal highway alone. The windows were down, the ocean scent washing through. The coin glinted in her palm each time headlights passed. She didn't feel angry, just clean, like something that had been rusted for years had finally come loose. A pair of headlights appeared behind her, gaining ground fast. She pulled over at a small beach turnout. Roland's truck stopped beside her. He stepped out, no uniform, no command, just a man, sleeves rolled, carrying the same heaviness she'd carried for years. He walked toward the water. "You shouldn't have had to wait for me to speak," he said. "But you did," she answered. He nodded, pulling a folded mission report from his jacket. Operation Revenant. Her name was there, blacked out under thick ink lines. "They classified everything," he said, "but we never forgot your call sign. I thought silence would protect you. I was wrong. It protected my ego and Zach." Michelle looked out at the waves. "Yeah," she said, "him too." Roland reached into his pocket again and produced another coin, older, scratched, its engraving half-worn. "This one's from my team. We kept it for the day we could thank you right." She took it, the metal cold against her palm. 2 coins, 2 truths. "We're good, Captain," she said quietly. "Just don't stay silent again." He nodded toward the water. No more silence. When she turned to leave, his voice followed, quieter than the sea. "Zach, not angry at you. He's angry at himself for not earning what you did. Then maybe it's time he learns how to earn something real." The wind shifted, cooler now, carrying the smell of salt and smoke. She looked back once, seeing Roland standing ankle-deep in surf, the moon painting him in silver. For the first time, the man looked free of command, small in the best possible way. She closed her hand around both coins. The tide rolled in, carrying away the last sound of the night. No more silence. The next dawn found her on the runway at Pensacola. Sunlight glared off the tarmac, turning every metal surface into a mirror. A ceremony was about to begin, one she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. The Navy Commendation for Outstanding Service in Joint Operations. 10 years too late, but maybe right on time. She stood at attention as the band played. When her name was called, applause filled the hangar. She stepped forward, crisp salute, even breath, eyes steady. Cameras flashed, medals gleamed, and for once the recognition didn't feel heavy. It just felt right. Then she saw him, Roland, standing at the back of the crowd in his old SEAL uniform, ribbons faded but posture perfect. The sight hit her harder than any medal. When the applause faded, he walked toward her, holding his cap. "You make the uniform look better than any of us ever did," he said. "Don't exaggerate, Captain." He straightened, eyes wet but unashamed, and saluted. The crowd stilled. A few SEALs followed, heads bowed. She returned the salute, her throat tight. No words were needed. The salute said everything silence had hidden. After the ceremony, Roland handed her a faded photograph, him as a young officer beside a pilot whose face was washed out by sunlight. "Never got her name," he murmured. "Now I know why." That night her phone buzzed. A message from Zach. "Saw the video. You deserved it. Proud of you." She read it twice. It was short, honest enough. The reflection of her medal blurred as her eyes filled, not with pain but peace. 2 generations, 1 salute. Finally, no silence left between them. How long does it take for pride to turn into peace? For the Butler family, it began with silence, different this time. Not the kind that hid truth, but the kind that followed understanding. The applause from Pensacola had barely faded, yet its echo reached further than any mission report ever could. Back home, Roland's photograph from that day sat framed on the mantel, him saluting, eyes lifted, pride tempered by something new. For the first time, he didn't look like a man who commanded the world. He looked like a man finally free from it. Michelle hadn't planned on staying in Jacksonville long. The Navy had another rotation waiting, and she had already packed her duffel before the ceremony ended. But the message from Zach lingered on her phone. "Saw the video. Proud of you." 3 words that meant more than all the laughter that had come before them. She thought about ignoring it, then she didn't. The next evening she drove through the familiar streets of her childhood. Spanish moss hung over cracked sidewalks. Kids rode bikes between sprinklers. Someone grilled burgers 2 houses down. Ordinary peace. The kind she used to mistake for smallness. When she pulled into the old driveway, Zach's truck was already there. The porch light was on. Roland sat in the rocker, a beer in one hand, a photo album in the other. He looked up as she stepped out. "You didn't think I'd miss the first quiet day in years, did you?" he said. "I figured you'd be out saving fishermen from storms." He smiled, the kind of tired smile that comes after decades of standing guard. Storms save themselves sometimes. Zach stepped onto the porch behind him. No grin this time, no bravado, just the shadow of guilt. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." He motioned toward the chair beside him. "You, mind." She sat, her posture straight, her breath measured. The silence stretched, not tense, just full. I watched the ceremony twice, he began. Didn't realize you were that revenant one. Dad didn't talk about it. He didn't have to, she said. Wasn't his story to tell. Zach rubbed his palms together, a habit he had when words were heavy. You know, I thought I understood pride. Turns out I just understood noise. Michelle looked at him then, really looked. The boy who once mocked her was gone. In his place stood a man trying to unlearn everything he'd been raised to believe about strength. I guess we both inherited Dad's stubbornness, she said. Yeah, but you learned how to aim it better. They both laughed quietly, the sound small but honest. Roland watched them from his chair, eyes glassy, a ghost of a smile on his lips. If I'd known all it took was a medal and a public dressing down to fix you two, I'd have done it years ago. Not funny, Zach muttered. Then it worked, Roland said. Michelle shook her head, half smiling. You two should have been comedians. Roland raised his beer. Too late, my axe retired. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them framed by porch light and memory. When Roland finally spoke again, his tone shifted, softer. You know, I always thought silence meant strength. Keep it together, stay composed, don't show what's underneath. That's how I was trained. I know, she said. But I was wrong. Silence just delayed the damage. Yours, mine, Zach, everyone. Michelle nodded slowly. Maybe silence isn't the enemy. Maybe it just needs a better purpose. Roland's gaze lingered on her. And what's that? Peace, she said. Not hiding, just peace. He smiled again, faintly. Guess I raised at least one philosopher. Don't worry, she said. I still know how to fly. That earned a real laugh from him, rough and genuine. As the night cooled, they shared stories. Not of missions or medals, but of small things. Her first solo flight, Zach's first failed push-up contest, Roland's memory of almost quitting Bud S before someone reminded him why he started. The laughter that came was different now. Warm, shared. By the time Michelle stood to leave, the moon was high again, hanging over the ocean like a guardian. Roland stopped her at the steps. You coming by next weekend? We're doing a smaller thing, just family, no legends. I'll try. He nodded, try's good enough for now. When she reached her car, she looked back. The porch light caught them both, father and son, framed in gold. For the first time, she didn't feel outside it. A year later, summer returned softer. The Butler backyard no longer echoed with competition. The grill still smoked, the kids still ran, but the laughter had changed key. It no longer tried to prove anything. Roland moved slower these days. His hair had turned white, his shoulders bowed, but his eyes had never been clearer. Zach had traded his gym business for something quieter, veterans outreach. The program matched returning soldiers with civilian mentors, helping them land jobs, heal, adapt. When Michelle arrived that afternoon, Zach was in the middle of a conversation with a young Marine, explaining the paperwork with patience she'd never thought him capable of. His voice carried compassion now. He noticed her first. Look who finally decided to show up, he said, but there was no edge in his tone, just warmth. Someone has to make sure you don't burn the stakes again, she said. He laughed fair. Roland looked up from the patio table, smiling as he saw her. Commander Butler, he said, mock formal. Don't start, she warned. The rest of the family gathered, and for the first time in years, there was no invisible weight between them, just presence. When dinner began, Zach stood and cleared his throat. Before we eat, I want to say something. The chatter dimmed. Michelle raised an eyebrow. He nodded toward her. Everyone, meet Commander Michelle Butler, the pilot who brought my father home. Applause broke out, not forced, not ceremonial, real. Roland didn't speak. He just sat watching her, eyes shining, emotion written plainly for once. Her mother leaned over and whispered, Finally, people know who you are. That's not why I came, Michelle said quietly. I know, her mother replied. That's why it matters. From the edge of the table, Evan, Zach's son, now 6, raised his voice. "Dad says you flew through storms to save people." The laughter softened into smiles. Michelle crouched to the boy's level. "I just didn't leave them behind," she said. Evan's eyes widened, absorbing every word. "I want to fly too." "Then learn how to land first," she said, smiling. The adults chuckled, but behind the laughter, Roland's composure cracked. His hand trembled as he reached for his glass. A single tear slipped down his cheek, catching the late sunlight. Zach noticed. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder, his own voice trembling. "I should have known better," he said. Michelle looked at him. "Now you do." He nodded, eyes bright. "Yeah, now I do." The moment held, raw, unscripted, perfect. Later, when the sun began to drop, painting everything in amber, Roland found her by the porch steps. He held out the old seal coin, the one that had passed through years of guilt and gratitude. Its edges were worn smooth now. "This belongs with you," he said. "Always did." Michelle looked past him to where Evan was chasing fireflies in the yard. The boy's laughter carried like wind bells. "Keep it," she said softly. "Let him see it every day. Let him know what it means." Roland hesitated, then nodded. He walked to Evan and knelt, pressing the coin gently into the boy's small palm. "This used to belong to someone who taught us all what real courage looks like," he said. Evan held it up, the sunset catching its surface until the light danced across the trees. "It's shiny," he said. Roland laughed, a full, unguarded sound. "Yeah," he whispered, "it is." Zach watched from the porch, arms crossed, quiet pride in his eyes. When the light faded, he looked at his cousin. "Guess we both found what we were looking for." "Respect?" she asked. "Peace," he said. The words settled between them like the tide, soft, certain, unstoppable. As the last rays disappeared, the backyard fell into a hush. Not empty this time, earned. That night Michelle sat alone on the beach again. The moon hung low, mirrored in the black water. She turned the second coin, the one from Roland's team, over in her hand. It was heavier now, not from weight, but from meaning. So many years she'd believed strength was measured by silence, by control, by holding herself together when no one else did. But maybe real strength wasn't the absence of emotion. Maybe it was letting yourself feel everything and still standing steady. Her phone buzzed. A message from Zach again. "Thanks for coming. Evan hasn't stopped talking about you. I think he's already practicing his salute." She smiled. "Tell him to use both hands next time." "Will do." She slipped the phone into her pocket and looked out at the endless stretch of dark water. Somewhere above it, jets traced invisible paths, their lights faint but steady. 12 years ago, she'd left this coast believing silence was armor. Tonight, she understood it could also be peace. The waves rolled closer, whispering against the sand, erasing every footprint she'd left behind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How many summers can pass before a place stops feeling like home? 12 years, apparently. When Michelle Butler turned her car off the coastal highway, Jacksonville looked smaller, quieter, like a photograph that had finally faded to peace. Pines still bent toward the sea. The same salt wind rattled the mailbox that had carried nothing but bad news during deployments. But now it hummed with the sound of cicadas and ordinary life. The old Butler house stood at the edge of the dunes, its paint sun-worn, its porch lined with hanging ferns and a lifetime of framed photographs. She parked and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Every year she promised she'd stop by. Every year duty came first. Now, with retirement orders in hand and her flight suit folded neatly in the back seat, there was no more later. Inside, the hallway smelled of cedar and coffee. Photos covered the walls, Roland in his SEAL days, Zach at community events, Evan in graduation blues. And right in the middle, a frame she hadn't seen before, a photo of her younger self in flight gear, sunlight flaring off the visor. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, The words "Revenant One, Family of the Brave." She stood there longer than she meant to, her reflection merging with the photo's glass. For the first time, her name didn't feel like a secret. A voice broke the stillness. Aunt Michelle. Evan appeared from the living room, taller than she remembered, shoulders broad, expression calm. 18 now. The boy who once clutched the seal coin like treasure had grown into someone composed, deliberate, Roland's steadiness mixed with Zach's spark. "You came," he said, grin forming slowly. "I said I would." He wiped his hands on a rag he'd been polishing picture frames. "Grandpa's on the porch. He'll be happy." She followed him through the kitchen, sunlight slanting across worn counters. Outside, Roland sat in his rocker, Kane leaning beside him. His hair had thinned to silver, the skin around his eyes folded in soft lines. Yet when he looked up, command still flickered there, tempered by gentleness. "Look what the tide brought in," he said. "I'd argue it was the wind," she replied. He chuckled, low and warm. "Still flying with that mouth, I see." "Retired now," she said, lowering herself onto the step. "Grounded officially." Roland studied her face, nodding slowly. "You don't look grounded, you look lighter." "Maybe it's the lack of altitude." Evan set a tray of lemonade between them. He lingered, clearly wanting to stay but unsure if he should. Michelle gestured to the railing. "Sit, Lieutenant Junior Civilian." He laughed and obeyed. The three of them sat watching the late-day sun melt into the horizon. For a while no one spoke. The only sound was the creak of wood and the hum of cicadas. Roland broke the quiet first. "You made this family understand what service really means." Michelle smiled softly. "Took a few barbecues to do it." Evan looked between them, curious. "Dad says the first one was pretty rough." "Your dad had a sharp tongue," Roland said. "Still does," Michelle added. "Just points it in better directions now." They laughed, the easy kind that comes after years of hard conversations. Evan turned serious. "Aunt Michelle, were you scared that night, in the desert?" She didn't answer immediately. The waves beyond the dunes shimmered with late sunlight. "Yes," she said finally. "But courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about flying anyway." He nodded, eyes wide. "Dad says bravery runs in the Butler blood." "No," she said, "it runs in choice." Roland's rocker creaked to a stop. He looked at her with quiet pride. "Choice, that's a good word for it." For a long while they just watched the sky fade to gold. Evan toyed with the coin in his hand, the same seal coin once pressed into his palm years ago. Its surface was dulled now from being carried everywhere. "Grandpa says this belongs to you," he said, "but I think he's wrong." Michelle shook her head. "He's not wrong, he's generous." Evan turned it over. "Sometimes I look at it before exams, makes me feel steady." "Then keep it," she said. "That's what it's for." Roland's voice came soft, graveled. "Funny thing about medals and coins. They're just metal until someone remembers why they were earned." Michelle looked at him. "And you remember now." He smiled, tired but peaceful. "Every day." The porch light flickered on automatically, bathing them in amber glow. The sea breeze carried faint laughter from neighbors down the beach, another family gathering, another circle of stories. But for the Butlers, the story had finally settled. Inside, Zach's voice called out, "Food's ready if anyone's hungry." Roland waved his cane in mock authority. "Bring it out here. Veterans eat facing the ocean." When Zach stepped outside, apron on, holding a tray of burgers, he froze. The sight of his cousin and father sitting together, both smiling, seemed to stop him mid-motion. "Now that's a picture," he said. "Better than the one where you set the grill on fire," Michelle teased. "That was tactical smoke concealment." Roland laughed until he coughed, shaking his head. "God help us." They ate on the porch, the evening settling into an easy rhythm, stories overlapping, laughter spilling past the railing. Zach's wife brought out pie. Evan ran inside for plates. The world felt small and right. When the plates were empty and the first stars appeared, Roland reached into his shirt pocket and drew out something wrapped in an old handkerchief. He placed it on the table between them. "This was my father's compass," he said. "Carried it through Vietnam. It stopped working years ago, but I kept it as a reminder. Even when the needle breaks, you still know which way home is." He looked at Michelle, then at Evan. "I think it's time it found new hands." Evan started to protest, but Roland shook his head. "Not for direction," he said, "for memory." The boy unfolded the cloth carefully. The brass was dull, the glass scratched, but the arrow inside still quivered faintly as if remembering how to point. "Thanks, Grandpa," he whispered. Roland nodded, satisfied. "One day you'll know when to pass it on." Michelle felt the weight of the moment, the continuity, the quiet grace of generational healing. Zach leaned back, arms crossed. "Looks like the family finally stopped competing over who's toughest." "About time," Michelle said. Roland smiled faintly. "Turns out the toughest one was quiet all along." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Later that night, after the house went still, Michelle stepped onto the sand alone. The moon carved a silver path across the water. Each wave whispered against her boots, erasing the footprints she left behind. For years she'd measured life by missions, flight hours, objectives. Tonight there were none, just breath, tide, and gratitude. She thought about the people she'd lost, the voices that still haunted her in quiet moments. She let them drift in, then out like waves. Not gone, just at peace. Behind her, the porch door creaked open. Roland's cane tapped softly on the wood. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Didn't try," she said. He walked until he stood beside her. "You know, I used to come out here after every deployment. Didn't know why. Maybe to listen to something that didn't need orders. Guess I inherited that too." He nodded. "Could be worse." They stood in silence, the surf glowing faintly under moonlight. After a while he spoke again. "You ever think about teaching? Flight school maybe? Passing it on?" "I've thought about it. You'd be good at it." She smiled. "You just want to make sure the next generation knows how to argue properly." "Exactly," he said. A shooting star cut across the horizon. For a heartbeat, both followed it until it vanished into the dark. Roland exhaled slowly. "I don't have many summers left," he said, "but I'm glad this one's quiet." Michelle turned to him. "You earned it." He shook his head. "We earned it." The waves came in one more time, soft and sure, as if agreeing. The following morning broke bright and clean. Evan was already on the porch, polishing the coin and the compass side by side. When he saw her, he smiled. "I signed up," he said. She blinked. "For what?" "ROTC, flight track." Michelle stared for a long moment, half proud, half terrified. "You sure?" He nodded. "You once said courage is flying anyway." She smiled despite herself. "I need to stop giving good advice." He laughed. "Too late." From inside, Zach called, "Breakfast." Roland's voice followed. "Tell them to hurry before I eat everything." Michelle looked at Evan, the light catching the coin in his palm, the compass glinting beside it, and felt something shift quietly inside her. The story was still being written, but it no longer needed her to hold it together. "Keep your bearings," she said. "I will." As they walked back toward the house, jets thundered overhead, T-45 trainers slicing through the sky in perfect formation. Their reflection flashed off the porch windows, bright and fleeting. Evan looked up, eyes shining. "Someday," he whispered. Michelle watched the planes disappear into blue. "Someday," she agreed. The porch door swung open, releasing the smell of coffee and pancakes, laughter spilling out. Roland sat waiting, cane across his knees, content. She stepped inside, the sound of family surrounding her, the rhythm of peace steady at last. The silence that followed wasn't absence anymore. It was arrival. What does a soldier do when the mission is over, but her purpose refuses to land? For Michelle Butler, the answer came one autumn morning wrapped in the hum of engines. She was back at Pensacola, this time not as a pilot but as an instructor candidate. Rows of training jets glimmered on the tarmac, their noses pointed toward a horizon she used to chase. The smell of jet fuel felt like memory, sharp enough to wake something inside her that she thought she'd buried with her uniform. She hadn't planned to teach. Retirement was supposed to be simple: sunrises, coffee, the ocean outside her window. But the day Evan announced his ROTC acceptance, the wind had shifted. Watching his eyes light up when he talked about flight patterns and navigation charts had stirred a quiet urgency inside her. Someone had once guided her. Maybe now it was her turn. Her first class was small, 8 cadets, nervous and wide-eyed. They called her Commander Butler, even though she corrected them twice. She taught them to respect the checklist, to trust their instruments but never surrender to them. And she taught them that courage didn't come from swagger. It came from silence, from the moment right before takeoff when every fear screamed and the pilot breathed through it anyway. Most days ended with her sitting alone on the flight line, watching the orange sky fade into blue. She'd close her eyes and hear the ghosts of radio chatter: copy, Revenant 1, vector cleared. The voices never left, they just learned to whisper. That winter, Roland's health began to falter. Nothing dramatic, just fatigue at first, the kind that stole hours quietly. By spring, his steps had slowed, his hands trembled when he lifted his coffee, but his mind stayed sharp. Michelle visited every weekend. She'd find him on the porch, the same place where every truth in their family had once surfaced. "Still teaching kids how to argue with altitude," he'd tease. "Still teaching me how to listen," she'd answer. Some evenings she'd bring Evan along, home on short leave from training. The boy, no, the young man, carried himself differently now. Straight back, focused eyes, every move deliberate. But when he laughed, she still heard the 6-year-old who once held a coin like it was treasure. One evening, Roland asked to see it again. Evan placed the coin in his palm. The old man turned it over, thumb tracing the worn edges. "You kept it well," he said. Evan nodded. "You told me it was for remembering." Roland smiled faintly. "Then I did something right." He handed it back, eyes distant. "Just don't let it weigh you down. Symbols can inspire, but they can also chain you to ghosts." "I know," Evan said quietly. "Aunt Michelle told me the same thing." Roland looked at her then, that same mix of command and gratitude she'd seen the night he made Zach apologize. "Guess she learned faster than I did." Michelle looked away, fighting the sting in her throat. "Maybe I just had a better teacher." By early summer, Roland's strength faded faster. The doctors called it heart failure, but Michelle knew it was time. An enemy no SEAL could outmaneuver. He refused hospitals, choosing the porch instead, the ocean as his monitor, the wind as his IV. One evening, when the horizon turned pink, he asked for her alone. Zach had stepped inside to answer calls. Evan was cleaning the grill, and the house hummed with quiet preparation for a final goodbye none of them wanted to name. Roland's voice came soft. "You know, I never asked what revenant means to you." She sat beside him. "It means coming back when no one expects you to." He nodded slowly, fitting. She watched his chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. "Do you regret anything?" He chuckled weakly. "Everything and nothing. I regret waiting too long to speak, but if I hadn't, maybe we wouldn't be here now, peaceful." The sun bled into the water, gold giving way to red. He reached for her hand. "Promise me something, Michelle." "Anything." "When Evan earns his wings, be there. Don't stand in the shadows. Let him know where he comes from." "I will." He closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. "Good, then I can rest." She stayed long after his breathing slowed into sleep, her hand still wrapped around his. The ocean murmured against the dunes like a lullaby. Somewhere in the distance, A lone jet cut across the sky, one last salute. Roland Butler passed 2 weeks later. The ceremony was small, naval colors folded, a bugle's cry carried off by the wind. Michelle stood in full uniform for the first time in years, Zach beside her, Evan at attention. When the final note faded, Zach stepped forward, voice low. He wanted you to have this. He held out the compass, Roland's father's, the one given to Evan the year before. Its arrow still trembled faintly inside the cracked glass. I can't, Michelle said. Zach shook his head. He said you'd know when to pass it again. Until then, it's yours. She accepted it with both hands. Then I'll keep it pointed home. After the burial, the family gathered at the porch. There were stories, quiet tears, a toast with old whiskey. When the sun sank behind the pines, the three of them, Michelle, Zach, and Evan, stood together looking at the flag folded on the table. Zach broke the silence first. He'd have liked this. Everyone together, no speeches. He hated speeches, Michelle said. Evan smiled faintly. He said silence tells the truth better. Michelle nodded. He was right. For a while, no one moved. The world seemed suspended between grief and gratitude. Then Zach exhaled, deep and sure. We'll be all right. Michelle believed him. Months passed. The seasons turned gentle. Michelle returned to teaching full-time. Her students called her Commander Quiet, a name she didn't correct. She'd become known for her composure in emergencies, her ability to land simulations that left others trembling. Every class, she told them one rule that wasn't in the manual: respect the silence before action. That's where courage lies. One evening, she was grading flight reports when a shadow fell across her desk. Evan stood in the doorway, uniform pressed, cap tucked under his arm. You're supposed to be in Pensacola, she said. I am, he replied. Graduation's tomorrow. Her pen stopped. Tomorrow. He smiled. You promised. She did. The next morning dawned bright and windless. The base buzzed with ceremony, families gathering, cameras flashing, brass gleaming. Michelle stood among the crowd, hands clasped behind her back. For once she was nervous. When the names were called, Evan stepped forward, tall, calm, bearing that quiet steadiness she recognized instantly. As the wings were pinned to his chest, his eyes found hers in the crowd. For a moment the years collapsed, every lesson, every silence, every apology leading here. Afterward, when the music faded and cadets scattered to families, he walked straight to her. You made it, he said. I wouldn't miss it, she replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the seal coin, the same one Roland had given him. This belongs to you, he said. She shook her head. You've earned it now. So did you, he said, but you never kept it. She looked at the coin, edges worn, surface dulled. It's yours, she said. Every generation needs its own weight to carry. He smiled. Then at least take this. He handed her a small keychain, a miniature compass, engraved with the words Revenant Flight. Made it myself, he said, for when you forget how to land. Her throat tightened. Thank you. He grinned. Just remember to point home. The crowd called his name then, photos, salutes, the rhythm of new beginnings. Michelle stepped back, letting him take the moment fully. She didn't need the spotlight. Watching him was enough. That night she drove to the coast. The air was heavy with humidity and memory. She parked where the dunes began and walked until the sand cooled beneath her feet. The ocean stretched out endless, a dark mirror to the sky. She opened her hand. Inside lay the old compass, Roland's. The arrow quivered faintly toward the horizon. She knelt, pressed it into the wet sand, and whispered, You found your way home. A gust of wind swept through, carrying sea spray across her face. She smiled through it, eyes stinging, not from salt but from peace. Behind her, the roar of jets echoed faintly from the base. Training runs, probably Evan among them. She looked up, searching until she found a formation slicing across the stars, 3 lights moving as one. "Fly safe," she whispered. The jets curved toward the east, their engines fatting until only the surf remained. Michelle turned back toward the house, Roland's chair empty now, the porch light flickering like a heartbeat. She would teach again tomorrow. She would tell new cadets about courage, about silence, about a pilot who once flew through fire. She wouldn't mention her name. She didn't need to. Because some legacies don't live in stories. They live in the sky. What do you do when the sky that once saved you starts to take the people you love? For Michelle Butler, the answer came the same way every storm did, first a whisper, then the roar. It had been 18 months since Evan earned his wings. He was posted to a carrier group in the Atlantic, a routine assignment that felt anything but routine to her. Every evening she checked the flight deck live streams, pretending it was coincidence when she paused on the silhouette that looked like him. At the flight school, her cadets still called her Commander Quiet. They joked that she could land a jet on a postage stamp and never spill her coffee. But the truth was, the calm she wore had cracks now, hairline fractures she kept sealed with discipline. Letters arrived every few weeks from the ship. They were short, light on details but heavy on heart. Aunt M. Sees rough, food's worse. I still keep the coin in my locker. Dad says hi. I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant about silence before action. She always wrote back the same way, measured, understated, each sentence a stitched-up prayer. Keep your bearings. Remember, fear means you're paying attention. Then one night the phone rang. The voice on the other end was clipped, official. Commander Butler, this is Fleet Command. Your nephew's unit experienced an in-flight emergency. Everyone accounted for, but his aircraft went down near the Azores. Recovery underway. The words didn't sink in at first. Accounted for meant alive, but recovery meant not yet. She listened to the details, the malfunction, the search area, the storm, but heard only the hum of the line, the sound between syllables. When the call ended, she stood in the dark kitchen, hands still clutching the receiver, heartbeat syncing with the ticking clock. She hadn't prayed in years, yet the words came anyway. Bring him back. Within hours, she was in uniform again, flying commercial to Rhoda under advisor status. Regulations didn't allow family near operations, but someone on the base had read her record. Revenant one still carried weight in certain circles. When she arrived, the Atlantic wind hit her like an old rival. The rescue crews briefed her under gray morning light. Debris found, beacon signals faint. A storm cell was moving in fast. She looked at the satellite feed, finger tracing the coordinates. He would have ditched here, she said. He always favored east drift. The commander hesitated. Ma'am, that zone's already written off. Then unwrite it. Her tone left no room for rank. Within an hour, 2 helicopters launched. She rode in the second one, headset pressed tight, eyes locked on the horizon that had swallowed too many suns. Halfway through the second sweep, the sensor pinged, a heat anomaly barely above threshold. Could be wreckage, the co-pilot said. Or could be him, she answered. They descended through crosswinds that clawed at the rotors. Below, the ocean thrashed white and endless. Then she saw it, a flare, weak but deliberate, cutting through the rain. There. The winch lowered, a diver disappeared into spray, and minutes later, a human shape broke the surface, harnessed, lifted, alive. Evan. When they hauled him inside, soaked and shivering but breathing, Michelle felt the world contract to a single point, heartbeat against heartbeat. He opened his eyes, disoriented. Aunt M. Yeah, she whispered. Revenant one reporting for backup. He smiled faintly before passing out. 2 weeks later, back on U.S. soil, the story spread through the base like wildfire. Veteran pilot helps locate downed aviator nephew. The press wanted interviews. She refused them all. In private, she sat beside Evan's hospital bed, the room humming with machines and second chances. His injuries were light: a fractured rib, hypothermia, pride bruised worse than bone. "You broke regulation flying out there," he said one morning. "So did you, ejecting late. Guess we're related." "Unfortunate," she teased. He laughed, then winced. Grandpa would have said we overcorrected the butler's silence. "Maybe we finally learned how to use it," she said. He nodded toward the window where sunlight spilled across the sheets. "When I was in the water, I kept hearing you. Not words, just calm, like the sound right before takeoff." She swallowed hard. "That's where courage lives." He smiled. "You really should write that down." "I already did," she said, "in you." Months later, when he was cleared for duty, they returned together to Jacksonville. The house looked the same but sounded different, emptier without Roland, yet somehow still alive. Zach met them at the door, hugging his son so hard it bordered on interrogation. That night after dinner, Zach brought out Roland's folded flag. "He'd want you to have this," he told Evan, "but keep it flying, not framed." Evan nodded solemnly. Michelle watched the exchange, heart full and strange. The flag, the coin, the compass, 3 generations, 3 symbols, all now resting with the boy who'd once chased fireflies through this same yard. Later, she and Zach sat on the porch while Evan packed for his next station. The ocean whispered beyond the dunes. "You saved him," Zach said. "He saved himself," she replied. "Still," he said, eyes shining, "Dad used to think legacy was medals. Turns out it's moments." She looked at him, seeing not the brash cousin of her youth but a man worn into humility. "We finally got it right." "Yeah," he said softly, "took us long enough." Back at Pensacola, Michelle resumed teaching, but something had shifted. Her lectures became stories, not about tactics but about people. Cadets leaned forward when she spoke, sensing that her silence hid entire worlds. One day, mid-briefing, a recruit raised a hand. "Ma'am, were you really Revenant One?" The room went still. She met the question with a small smile. "Does it matter?" He flushed. "I guess not." "Good," she said, "because every one of you has a call sign waiting. It's not about fame. It's about what you do when no one's watching." The cadets nodded, writing it down as if it were doctrine. After class, she lingered alone, gazing out the hangar door at the runway. Evan's unit was training nearby. She could tell by the precision of the turns overhead. She watched the jets carve white paths across the blue until one peeled away, looping once before straightening, a tiny signature in the sky. She smiled. He always did have a flair for it. A year later, the Navy organized a memorial flyover for Roland Butler's centennial class. Old SEALs, pilots, and family gathered along the coast. Michelle stood in uniform beside Zach and Evan, the sea wind tangling the flag's edge. When the jets thundered overhead in missing man formation, sunlight struck the lead plane's wing just right, flashing gold. Evan leaned closer. "That one's me," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered. As the planes vanished into the horizon, applause rose, then faded into soft silence. The good kind, the kind that meant respect. Zach wiped his eyes and laughed under his breath. "Every time I hear those engines, I think of Dad yelling orders." Michelle smiled. "I think of him listening for once." They stood there until the sky dimmed, the tide crawling closer. When the crowd dispersed, Evan handed her something, a photo in a leather frame. It showed the 3 of them on the porch from years earlier, Roland in his chair, Zach mid-laugh, her beside him, half smile, half relief. On the bottom, Evan had written in careful block letters, "For the ones who flew through fire so others could come home." She traced the words with her thumb. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, "because silence forgets fast." She looked up at him, sunlight glinting off his wings. "Then don't let it." "I won't." That evening she returned alone to the beach. The water glowed violet under a fatting sky. She sat where Roland used to sit, compass and coin in her pocket, photo in her lap. For years she'd carried guilt like ballast, every mission, every secret, every unspoken apology. But now the weight felt different, transformed into something steady. She thought about all of them, the men she'd saved, the ones she couldn't, the family that had learned to speak truth in whispers. The tide reached her boots, cool and certain. A voice seemed to echo in memory, Roland's gravel and warmth overlapping with her father. Some people get applause, others get the sound of engines. She smiled, the engines were enough. Far out over the ocean, a single jet appeared, its lights faint but unmissable. It flew low, then climbed, cutting through a break in the clouds. She didn't need binoculars to know the pilot. Evan banked the aircraft once in salute. The sound reached her seconds later, a rolling thunder that pressed against her chest and vanished into distance. She stood, raising a hand instinctively though he couldn't see. Fly safe, Revenant 2. The plane disappeared into dusk. Behind her the house windows glowed warm, laughter drifting faintly through the wind. Zach's family, new voices, more stories. Michelle turned back toward the sea, whispering the words that had followed her since the beginning. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The waves answered in rhythm, washing over her footprints until the shore looked untouched, eternal. And in that endless, earned silence, she finally let go. When the next decade opened, the sky no longer frightened Michelle Butler. It humbled her. The airfield at dawn looked almost the same as the one she'd trained on 30 years ago. Same echo of boots on tarmac, same mist curling around hangar doors. But the voices were younger now, accents from everywhere. They called her ma'am with a mix of awe and affection. She still wore her instructor's jacket even after her retirement papers cleared. Nobody at Pensacola had the heart to take it from her locker. Her schedule was light, guest lectures, simulator evaluations, mentorship briefings, but she never missed a takeoff. Watching the new generation taxi out felt like prayer, short, unspoken, necessary. Evan had been gone 6 months on carrier rotation when the letter arrived. Handwritten, steady script, the kind pilots use when they still believe in permanence. Aunt M. You once said silence could mean peace. Out here, it's the only thing that reminds me who I am. We fly nights mostly, no chatter, just the ocean breathing under us. Every time I roll level, I think of your voice. Respect the quiet before the climb. Don't worry, I still keep the coin in my chest pocket. She read it 3 times, then folded it neatly into her flight log notebook. She didn't realize until later that her hands were trembling. That evening she drove to the coast. The same beach, same wind, but different stars. The town had built new boardwalk lights. The dunes were smaller, eaten by years of tides. She stood barefoot in the cold surf and whispered into the dark, "He's ready, Roland. He really is." Months turned into years. The world changed, new aircraft, new conflicts, new codes, but certain names still carried quiet weight. Revenant 1 was one of them. Students whispered it like legend. Some thought it was myth, others a call sign passed down like inheritance. Michelle never confirmed or denied it. She only smiled when a cadet asked about courage. "It's not something you keep," she'd say. "It's something you lend." By her 60s, she had become more story than instructor, her lessons quoted in manuals, her discipline a benchmark. Yet she still walked the flight line at sunrise, coffee in hand, checking tie-downs as if she were one storm short of another deployment. The first time she saw Evan again after his promotion, she almost didn't recognize him. He'd grown into command the way a tree accepts lightning, scarred but stronger. Captain Evan Butler, Operations Lead, Atlantic Fleet. His stride carried Roland's steadiness, his humor Zach's warmth, and his silence hers. They met halfway down the runway, no ceremony, no cameras, just wind. He saluted, "Reporting as ordered, ma'am." She laughed, "I don't outrank you anymore." "Habit," he said, "and respect." They walked in step, conversation easy. He told her about his crew, about the storms they'd chased, the rescues they'd led. She listened, proud and quiet, until he stopped mid-sentence and handed her something small, a silver pin shaped like wings over a flame. "What's this?" she asked. "New emblem," he said. "We're nomming the training unit after you. Revenant flight approved last week." Her breath caught. "Evan." "It's not about family," he said. "It's about what you taught all of us, that coming back isn't weakness, it's faith." For a moment she couldn't speak. The wind filled the space, carrying the faint roar of takeoff from the far end of the strip. She finally managed, "Then promise me something." "Anything." "When the next kid freezes on their first solo, tell them fear means they're paying attention." He smiled, already in the handbook. They laughed, and for the first time she realized how fully the legacy had left her hands. It no longer belonged to one name. It belonged to every pilot who'd learned to breathe through the silence. The following winter, news broke of a relief mission gone wrong in the North Atlantic. Michelle woke to the headline before dawn. Carrier strike group stranded in sub-zero storm, evacuation underway. Evan's unit. Her fingers hovered over the phone. She remembered the last time, years earlier, that other storm, but now she forced herself to stay still. She wasn't the rescuer anymore. She was the watcher, the one who taught them how to survive the waiting. Hours crawled by until a single line of text appeared. "Landed. Everyone safe." She exhaled, the sound half laugh, half sob. For the first time in decades, she let herself cry without restraint. Relief, pride, exhaustion, all of it tangled together. Later, the official report credited Captain E. Butler's team for executing a manual descent after communications failed. The detail that caught her eye wasn't in the press release. It was in a quiet memo forwarded from Fleet Command. During final approach, Captain Butler requested radio silence across all channels. Flight deck logs confirm he broke it only once, to say, "For Revenant 1, hold steady." She read the line until the words blurred. Then she folded the message and placed it beside the compass on her mantle. Spring returned warm and merciful. The air at Pensacola shimmered with the start of another class, fresh uniforms, nervous energy, the eternal rhythm of beginnings. Michelle had officially retired for the second time, yet she couldn't resist visiting the base. She stood at the edge of the runway as the cadets taxied out. Among them, a young woman with a braid tucked neatly under her helmet caught her eye. The girl turned, noticed Michelle watching, and offered a small salute. The gesture was uncertain, but the intent was real. The engines roared, wind whipping hair across her face. One by one, the trainers lifted off, the sound washing through her like heartbeat. She whispered to no one, "Keep them steady." A voice behind her said, "Still giving orders, Commander." She turned. Evan stood there, older now, eyes lined, grin familiar. He'd flown in unannounced just to see her. "I thought you had briefings," she said. "I did. Then I remembered who taught me priorities." He held out something wrapped in cloth. "We found this during maintenance on the old training jet. Figured it belongs to you." She unwrapped it. The original brass data plate from her first aircraft, Revenant 1, etched with wear but legible. She traced the letters, pulse trembling. "I thought they scrapped this years ago." "They did," he said, "but metal remembers." She laughed softly. "So do people." They watched the final plane vanish into cloud. Evan said, "They'll keep telling your story, you know." "They'll make it theirs," she corrected. "That's better." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I've got another deployment soon. Arctic run." "You always liked bad weather," she teased. "Runs in the blood." They stood a moment longer, letting silence settle like a promise. Then he hugged her tight, wordless. "Take care of the sky for me," she whispered. "I will." He pulled back, eyes glinting. "You know, Aunt Em, sometimes I think the air itself learned discipline from you." Or forgiveness, she said. They both smiled. That summer, Michelle finally left the coast for the mountains of North Carolina, smaller skis, calmer winds. She bought a cabin near a lake that mirrored clouds instead of chasing them. The locals knew her as the quiet woman with the steady hands who fixed the volunteer fire department's old radio when storms hit. Nobody there knew about call signs or missions, and that anonymity felt like grace. Every morning she walked to the dock, coffee steaming, notebook in hand. She'd begun writing, not a memoir, just reflections, fragments of advice for pilots who might never meet her. Lines like "Trust the checklist, but trust your instinct more," and "The world remembers noise, but it's silence that keeps you alive." Sometimes she'd hear jets high above, contrails cutting across the thin blue. She'd smile, whispering, "They're still flying." Letters from Evan arrived monthly now, shorter each time, partly because there was less to explain. Their conversations had become shorthand, a single sentence that carried entire histories. Weather rough, crew strong, still holding steady. R2. Revenant 2. She pinned each note to the corkboard above her desk. The pattern formed a map of gratitude. One evening, near sunset, a delivery truck stopped at her gate. The driver handed her a package, unmarked except for a Navy return address. Inside was a folded flag, a new commendation certificate, and a letter in Evan's handwriting. "Aunt M. Don't worry, no tragedy, we're all safe. The commendation for the unit. I just thought you should keep one copy. After all, every landing I make still starts with your voice." "Oui." At the bottom, he'd drawn a small compass arrow pointing home. She laughed softly through the tears that came anyway. "Still knows direction," she whispered. The evening wind swept through the open door, riffling pages of her notebook until one stopped under her hand. She glanced down at the unfinished sentence there and completed it slowly in pen. "Courage isn't the fire, it's the return flight through smoke." She closed the book. Outside, the lake reflected the first stars. Somewhere far above, she imagined the faint vibration of engines, the hum that had followed her entire life. Night deepened. She stepped onto the porch, air cool against her skin, and looked up. A distant aircraft blinked across the sky, tiny, deliberate. She raised her mug in quiet salute. "Hold steady," she murmured. The jet banked once, a small light against endless dark, and kept climbing until it disappeared beyond the ridge. The silence that followed was perfect, not empty, earned. What does it mean to come home, when home is everywhere you once said goodbye? For Michelle Butler, it meant waking before dawn, hearing the quiet lake breathe, and realizing she no longer flinched at silence. Her life had slowed into ritual: coffee at 6, notebook by the window, long walks with the sunrise. No alarms, no radio codes, no call signs in her ear. Yet the discipline never left. Every morning felt like pre-flight. Check the weather, assess the wind, breathe. The cabin was modest, just wood, light, and memories. On one wall hung the brass plate from Revenant 1, polished clean. Beneath it, the compass, the seal coin, and a photo of Roland, Zach, and Evan, 3 generations watching her smile with a pride none of them ever said aloud. She didn't need medals. The sky had been her witness. It was late autumn when she received the call. "Commander Butler," a young voice said. "This is Lieutenant Harris. I trained under Captain Butler. He asked me to forward something." Her heart skipped. "Is he all right?" "Yes, ma'am, alive, stationed near Iceland. He thought you'd appreciate this." A courier delivered it the next day. A small digital recorder wrapped in brown paper, no note, just a silver tag engraved Revenant 2. She hesitated before pressing play. Static filled the room first, then Evan's voice, calm and steady. "Aunt M, we've got a new batch of cadets, nervous as hell. Thought you'd like to know we still start briefings the same way you did. I tell them there's a moment before every flight when silence feels like doubt. And I tell them that's where faith begins. I think they're finally getting it. The ocean looks like glass tonight, stars everywhere. If you were here, you'd say the horizon's just hiding its next mission. Keep the sky safe for me, Revenant 2 out. The message ended with the faint hum of engines fading into static. She closed her eyes, hand pressed against the recorder, and smiled. Still flying, she whispered. That night she lit a single candle by the window. The flame reflected off the compass glass, the arrow trembling toward north. Some part of her, the soldier, the pilot, the survivor, still waited for orders. But another part, quieter and deeper, finally understood she'd already completed them. In spring, a letter arrived from the Naval Academy's leadership. They wanted to name a new scholarship after her, the Michelle Butler Aviator's Endowment for those who return. She almost declined, but then she thought of the faces she'd trained, the young woman with the braid, the trembling cadet who'd asked if fear was weakness, the ones who still whispered revenant like myth. She signed the approval. At the dedication ceremony that summer, she wore her old uniform, the sleeves loose now, the rank faded but respected. The auditorium was filled with cadets, officers, and flight crews. The air buzzed with restrained admiration. The commandant introduced her simply. She taught us that strength doesn't shout, it endures. When Michelle stepped to the podium, she paused. The room fell still. She looked out at the rows of faces, at their eagerness and unease. Then she said softly, "You'll all face moments when the cockpit feels smaller than your fear. Remember this, no one ever wins against the sky. You learn to move with it, to listen. And when you come home, do it quietly. The world doesn't need to hear your courage. It needs to feel it." Applause rose slowly, not loud but deep, the kind that meant understanding rather than awe. When she left the stage, a cadet approached with tears in her eyes. "Ma'am, I joined because of you." Michelle smiled, touched the girl's shoulder, "Then promise me something." "Yes, ma'am." "When the silence before the climb comes, don't fight it, trust it." The cadet nodded. Michelle walked out into the sunlight, the applause fading behind her. The sky stretched open, clear, endless, familiar. That night she returned home and wrote her final journal entry. "To whoever finds this, you won't know me, that's fine. What matters is that you remember this. Courage isn't noise or anger or fame. It's showing up when no one is watching and doing the right thing anyway. There's a moment before every decision where the world holds its breath. Breathe first, then move. If you ever lose direction, look up. The sky remembers us all." She closed the notebook, placed it under the compass, and turned off the light. The stars outside burned clean and infinite. For the first time in years, she slept deeply. No dreams of engines, just the slow rhythm of waves and wind. Months passed. Seasons turned golden, then silver. The world continued spinning without her name in its headlines, and she liked it that way. Neighbors often saw her by the lake at sunset, sketching clouds or tossing breadcrumbs to ducks. None of them knew she once commanded lives at 30,000 feet. She was just Miss Butler, the quiet one. Until the morning the mailman knocked. "Package for you, ma'am. No return address." Inside was a framed photograph, Evan standing with his squadron under a new banner. Across the fabric, in bold letters, "Revenant Flight for those who return." In front of the group, a stone plaque engraved with her words. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She touched the glass, eyes burning softly. "You remembered," she whispered. That evening she drove to the ridge overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the world gold and crimson. She sat on the hood of her truck, the plaque photo beside her, and watched contrails cross the sky in looping arcs. Maybe one of them was Evan. Maybe one of them was someone she'd never meet. It didn't matter. They were all pieces of the same flight, her flight. As the first stars appeared, she whispered, "Fly safe, Revenant 2. Keep the line straight." The wind answered like an old friend, soft, familiar, endless. Years later, cadets at the academy would still repeat her name in the same breath as Roland Butler. Some said she once landed a crippled jet with no instruments. Others claimed she'd stared down a general to save a crew. But the truth wasn't in the stories. It was in the culture she left behind, the quiet before takeoff, the discipline in calm voices, the understanding that courage could be gentle. In the simulator rooms, instructors began each session with her words, etched above the screens. Respect the silence before action. That's where courage lives. And every so often, a pilot, young, nervous, untested, would pause before throttle, close their eyes and feel it. A steadiness, a heartbeat, a whisper from a voice they never knew. Hold steady, Revenant 1. Back in the mountains, the cabin still stood long after Michelle Butler's final flight. Her chair faced the lake, her compass frozen on north. The wind moved through the trees the way her voice once moved through the air, soft but commanding. When the sun rose, its reflection on the water looked almost like wings. If anyone had stood on that dock, they might have heard it, the faint hum of an engine, far above, crossing east to west. But maybe it wasn't an engine at all. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was faith. Because somewhere beyond the clouds, legacy keeps flying. And down below, the world keeps breathing, steady, silent, grateful. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.